After graduating from college, I moved to a new city for a job opportunity. I found a spacious apartment in an old building downtown, sharing it with two other recent graduates, Megan and Jake. We hit it off immediately, excited about starting our new lives in the big city. But it wasn't long before our excitement turned to fear. The apartment was charming with its high ceilings, large windows, and creaky wooden floors. It even had an attic, which we found intriguing. The landlord mentioned it was used for storage and advised us not to go up there since it was old and unstable. We agreed, not giving it much thought at the time. Our first few weeks were great. We explored the city, hosted dinners, and enjoyed our new independence. However, we started noticing odd things happening around the apartment. It began with small, almost unnoticeable disturbances, lights flickering, strange noises at night, and the occasional misplaced item. We laughed it off, attributing it to the quirks of an old building. One night, as we were watching a movie, we heard a loud thud from above. It was unsettling, but we assumed something had fallen over in the attic. Jake volunteered to check it out, but Megan and I reminded him of the landlord's warning. We decided to ignore it and went back to our movie, trying to push the noise out of our minds. As days passed, the noises became more frequent and louder. We heard footsteps, dragging sounds, and faint whispers. It was unnerving, but we convinced ourselves it was just the building settling or our imaginations running wild. One night, Megan woke us up, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She had heard a whisper right next to her ear, but there was no one there. Jake and I tried to comfort her, suggesting it was just a vivid dream. But deep down, we were all starting to feel the weight of unease. The turning point came when we noticed a pattern in the disturbances. They always occurred around midnight. Trying to find an explanation, we decided to stay up together one night, armed with flashlights and kitchen knives, ready to confront whatever was causing the noises. As midnight approached, the air in the apartment felt thick with tension. We sat in the living room, straining to hear any sound. At exactly midnight, we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the attic. Our hearts pounded as we exchanged nervous glances. Jake, being the bravest among us, decided it was time to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the attic ladder. Megan and I followed closely behind, our anxiety growing with each step. As Jake pushed open the attic door, a musty smell wafted down, and the air felt colder. We climbed the ladder slowly, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The attic was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and cobwebs. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But then we saw it, a small, dusty mattress in the corner, with what appeared to be old, tattered blankets. Our blood ran cold when we noticed something else. There were fresh footprints in the dust, leading from the mattress to the attic door. We weren't alone up here. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. We screamed, our flashlights flickering as we scrambled to the door. It wouldn't budge. Panic set in as we banged on the door, shouting for help. The footsteps started again, but this time they were coming towards us. In the dim light, we saw a shadowy figure moving, and a cold, sinister laugh echoed through the attic. Just as we felt all hope was lost, the door burst open, and our landlord stood there, a look of shock on his face. He quickly helped us down and locked the attic door behind us. We were shaken, barely able to speak as we tried to explain what had happened. The landlord revealed that the building had a dark history. Years ago, a previous tenant had gone mad and was rumored to have lived in the attic, terrorizing the other residents. He had been evicted, but strange occurrences continued, leading to the attic being sealed off. We moved out the next day, unable to stay in the apartment any longer. The experience left us traumatized, haunted by the memories of that night. Living with roommates can be challenging enough, but when the past comes back to haunt you, it can turn your life into a nightmare. I always thought that finding a roommate through mutual friends was the safest bet, but that illusion shattered when I discovered the dark secret my new roommate, Brian, had been hiding. I had just moved to a new city for a job opportunity and needed a place to stay. A friend of mine introduced me to Brian, who had an extra room available in his apartment. Brian seemed like a great guy, friendly, easygoing, and he worked as an IT specialist. We hit it off immediately, and I moved in within a week. At first, living with Brian was fantastic. We shared a love for gaming and often spent evenings playing video games or watching movies. The apartment was clean and well-maintained, and Brian's tech savviness meant we had all the latest gadgets. He even installed a top-notch security system, which made me feel safe. However, as time went on, I started to notice odd things. Sometimes, when I came home from work, I would find items in my room slightly out of place. A book moved, clothes shifted, my laptop repositioned. At first, I brushed it off, thinking I was being paranoid, but the feeling of being watched persisted. One night, while I was in the living room, I caught Brian staring at me from the hallway. When I asked if everything was okay, he quickly looked away and mumbled something about needing to check the security system. I shrugged it off, but the incident left me feeling uneasy. A few weeks later, I had a particularly stressful day at work and decided to take a long, hot shower to relax. As I was drying off, I noticed a small, blinking red light coming from the air vent. My heart pounded as I realized it was a hidden camera. I quickly covered up and inspected the vent closer, confirming my worst fears. Panicked, I checked the rest of the bathroom and found another hidden camera behind the mirror. My mind raced, and I felt a wave of nausea. Who had placed these cameras, and how long had they been recording me? I confronted Brian that evening. He seemed genuinely shocked and denied knowing anything about the cameras. He suggested we call the police, but something in his eyes made me doubt him. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the cameras and wondering if there were more hidden around the apartment. The next day, while Brian was at work, I decided to conduct a thorough search of the place. In my room, I found another hidden camera inside a smoke detector. The realization that Brian had been spying on me this entire time made my skin crawl. I felt violated and helpless. I decided to act quickly. I packed a bag with essentials and planned to leave that night. As I was gathering my things, Brian came home unexpectedly early. He saw the packed bag and immediately understood what was happening. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice cold and menacing. "I know about the cameras, Brian. I'm leaving," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Brian's face twisted with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Those cameras are for security purposes." I didn't believe him for a second. "Security purposes in my bedroom and bathroom? Do you think I'm that stupid?" Brian's expression shifted from anger to something darker. "You should have minded your own business, Alex." Fear surged through me as Brian advanced. I knew I had to get out of there. I grabbed my bag and made a run for the door. Brian lunged at me, but I managed to dodge him and sprinted down the hallway. I fled the apartment and called the police from a nearby convenience store. They arrived quickly and escorted me back to the apartment. Brian tried to act innocent, but the police found the cameras and arrested him on the spot. It turned out Brian had a history of installing hidden cameras in his previous apartments and spying on his roommates. The thought of how many people he had violated made my stomach churn. I moved out immediately and found a new place to live, this time with someone I knew and trusted. The experience left me shaken and paranoid about my privacy, but it also taught me a valuable lesson about the importance of being cautious and aware of who you live with. Over time, I found a new job in a different city and cautiously started looking for a new place to live. This time opting for a smaller, more secure apartment where I could live alone. I invested in my own security system, ensuring I had control over who had access to my space. It's been over a year since that horrifying experience with Brian, and while the fear has lessened, it hasn't disappeared completely. I still check for hidden cameras out of habit, and I find it hard to fully trust new people. But I'm stronger now, more aware of the potential dangers that can lurk behind a friendly facade. Living with Brian was a nightmare, and the fear of being watched still lingers. I can only hope that sharing my story will help others avoid the same fate. My name is Emily, and I used to think that finding a roommate online was the best solution to splitting rent costs. That was until I met Claire, the woman who turned my life into a living nightmare. It all started a year ago when I moved into a quaint two-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Claire was my new roommate, a seemingly kind and friendly woman in her late 20s. She was neat, polite, and worked as a graphic designer from home. We bonded over our shared love for cooking and Netflix binge-watching sessions. The first few weeks were great, and I felt like I had found the perfect roommate. However, things started to change subtly. Claire began to show an unusual interest in my personal life. She would ask detailed questions about my work, my friends, and even my family. At first, I thought she was just trying to be friendly, but her questions became more intrusive over time. She wanted to know where I was going, who I was meeting, and what time I would be back. It was as if she was trying to control my every move. One evening, I came home later than usual after meeting a friend for dinner. Claire was waiting for me in the living room, her face a mask of concern. "Where were you?" "I was so worried," she said, her voice trembling. I assured her I was fine, but her reaction seemed over the top for someone I had known for just a few weeks. Over the next few months, Claire's behavior became increasingly possessive. She would text me constantly while I was at work, asking when I would be home and what I was doing. If I didn't respond immediately, she would call repeatedly until I answered. It felt like I was being smothered, and the apartment no longer felt like a safe space. One weekend, I decided to visit my parents who lived out of town. I didn't tell Claire about my plans, hoping to avoid her barrage of questions. However, as soon as I arrived at my parents' house, my phone started buzzing with messages and calls from Claire. "Where are you? Why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" she demanded. I felt a chill run down my spine. How did she know I had left? When I returned home on Sunday evening, I found Claire sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. "We need to talk," she said without looking at me. She accused me of being secretive and dishonest, and insisted that as roommates we should share everything with each other. Her intensity scared me, and I realized I needed to find a way out of this situation. The final straw came one night when I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. I heard Claire's footsteps outside my room, and then the sound of my doorknob turning. I had locked my door, a precaution I had started taking recently. Claire jiggled the doorknob a few times, then knocked softly. "Emily, are you awake?" she whispered. I pretended to be asleep, my heart pounding in my chest. After a few minutes, she left, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped in my own home. The next day, I decided to look through Claire's room while she was out. I felt guilty for invading her privacy, but I needed answers. What I found was terrifying. Claire had a notebook filled with details about my life, my schedule, my friends, my habits. She had even taken photos of me without my knowledge. I realized then that I was living with someone who was obsessed with controlling me. I knew I had to leave, but I couldn't let Claire know my plans. I started packing my things slowly, hiding boxes in my car when she wasn't around. I found a new place to live and arranged to move out on a day when Claire was scheduled to be out all day. The morning of my move, I left a note on the kitchen counter, explaining that I couldn't live with her anymore and that I needed my space. I didn't go into details, fearing her reaction if she knew I had gone through her things. As I drove away from the apartment for the last time, I felt a mixture of relief and fear. Claire called and texted me repeatedly over the next few days, but I never responded. I changed my phone number and blocked her on all social media. Even now, months later, I still feel a lingering sense of unease. I learned a valuable lesson about trusting my instincts and the importance of being cautious when choosing a roommate. Claire's possessive nature left a lasting impact on me, a reminder that sometimes the people we invite into our lives can become our worst nightmares. My name is Jamie, and I've always been cautious about who I let into my life. But when I moved to a new city for college, I had to find a roommate quickly. That's when I met David, and my life took a dark turn. I moved to the city a week before the semester started, excited about the new chapter in my life. The college dorms were full, so I had to find an off-campus apartment. After browsing through various ads, I found one that seemed perfect. It was a 2-bedroom apartment near campus, reasonably priced, and the current tenant, David, was looking for a roommate. David seemed normal enough during our first meeting. He was a bit older, maybe in his late 20s, and worked night shifts at a local factory. He was clean, respectful, and seemed eager to have someone share the rent. I moved in a few days later, ready to start my college adventure. At first, things were fine. David and I had different schedules, so we didn't see each other much. He would come home early in the morning and sleep while I was at school, and by the time I got home in the evening, he was getting ready for work. We had polite conversations in passing, but that was the extent of our interactions. One evening, about a month after I moved in, I noticed something strange. I came home to find David sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, which was turned off. He didn't seem to notice me at first, and when he did, he gave me a forced smile and went to his room without a word. It was unsettling, but I chalked it up to him being tired from work. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice more odd behaviors. David started leaving his door slightly ajar at night, and I could hear him whispering to himself. Sometimes I would catch him watching me, quickly looking away when I noticed. I started feeling uneasy in my own home, but I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. One night, I woke up to the sound of something rustling in my room. My heart pounded as I strained to see in the darkness. I flipped on the bedside lamp and saw David standing in the doorway, his eyes wide and unblinking. "David? What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. Instead, he just stood there, staring at me for what felt like an eternity before turning and leaving without a word. I locked my door that night and every night after. The final straw came a few nights later. I was sitting in the living room studying for an upcoming exam when David came home. He seemed agitated, pacing back and forth in the kitchen. Suddenly, he stopped and turned to me, his eyes wild. "Jamie, do you believe in fate?" he asked, his voice low and intense. I felt a chill run down my spine. "I guess so," I replied cautiously. He stepped closer, his expression darkening. "I think it's fate that brought us together, don't you see? We were meant to be here, in this moment." I stood up, my instincts screaming at me to get out. "David, I don't know what you're talking about, but you're scaring me." His face twisted into a sinister smile. "You don't need to be scared, Jamie. I won't let anything happen to you. We're connected." I grabbed my phone and backed towards my room. "I'm going to my room now. Please, leave me alone." David's smile faded, replaced by a look of anger. "You don't understand, do you? You can't leave. We're meant to be together." I bolted to my room, locking the door behind me and dialing 911. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, but my hands were shaking. The operator assured me that help was on the way. As I waited, I could hear David outside my door, mumbling to himself and occasionally pounding on the door. The minutes felt like hours until I finally heard the sound of sirens. I opened the window and shouted for help, and moments later, the police burst through the front door. David was taken into custody, and I was left to explain everything to the officers. They found several notebooks in David's room, filled with disturbing writings and drawings, all centered around me. It turned out that David had a history of mental illness and had stopped taking his medication. I moved out the next day, staying with a friend until I could find a new place. The experience left me shaken and paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder and double-checking locks. I continued my studies, but the fear lingered, a constant reminder of how quickly things can go wrong. Looking back, I realize how important it is to trust your instincts and take action when something feels wrong. Living with a dangerous stranger was a nightmare, but it taught me valuable lessons about personal safety and awareness. Now, I always take extra precautions when choosing roommates and never ignore the warning signs. Sharing my story is my way of helping others avoid the same fate and stay safe in their own homes.